Reports have emerged recently saying that car manufacturers, they've essentially lied about the emissions of their cars. They've really kind of stretched the truth in an extreme way. Now, we all knew that this was happening, but we didn't know that it was this bad. We didn't know that Toyota was actually emitting 4 times more emissions in its hybrid vehicles than what it was saying, which is pretty damning. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. It's great to see you. What's happening here with this story? Well, we've seen that The Driven, which is an Australian publication, published an article that says Toyota's plug-in hybrids are emitting 4 times more CO2 than the company is claiming. Realistically, we all know that diesel and gasoline or petrol-powered vehicles have been emitting more emissions than we think. This is normal. I mean, there's been so many cases now where companies have been caught out doing this, but realistically, in real world scenarios, almost no car that's not electric, so almost no internal combustion car is emitting the actual pollution that manufacturers say. It's always higher. New data released by the European Union Environment Agency shows car makers are massively overestimating the efficiency of their vehicles. That's for petrol or gas, diesel and plug-in hybrid vehicles. This study uses real-world data, so this is not manufacturers' data that's just sort of plucked out of a hat, on over 500,000 vehicles, and it found that car companies are underestimating CO2 emissions per kilometre by around 20% for gasoline-powered vehicles or petrol-powered vehicles and 15% for diesel. It's a bit worse for diesel because those emissions are so incredibly bad for you. But it is hybrids where you think you're driving a relatively clean car. Probably not. This is where the WLTP figures, which are used by car companies for official data, they are completely bogus. And the biggest reason for this is in Europe, a lot of people are not plugging these cars in. They're not charging them. The average WLTP CO2 emissions figure across 124,000 hybrids sold in the EU was 39.6 grams per kilometre of CO2. So for every kilometre driven, around 40 grams of CO2 is being emitted. But the actual real world average is 140. So 40, 80, it's insane. It's way more than double. An enormous gap of around 100 grams per kilometre, with the real world figure being 3.5 times higher than the WLTP, says The Driven. EU mandatory real world vehicle emission data reporting is showing the claims from these companies are pretty false about the actual emissions being generated. And it's really misleading. A lot of people think, the emissions from my hybrid are really good, but they're not. Many may be surprised to learn that huge amounts of real-world data collected by manufacturers on efficiency shows that the emissions are staggeringly higher than what people thought. Now, these graphs, tables, they illustrate the results of this monitoring exercise based on an analysis of the data reported by vehicle manufacturers in 2022 as read out from new vehicles first registered in 2021. So this is for vehicles registered basically between 2022 and 2023. They show average laboratory and real-world CO2 emissions and fuel consumption of those vehicles, along with a calculated gap between the average laboratory, WLTP, and real-world values. And you can see in these data sheets which manufacturers are, you could say, exaggerating, or you could say lying more than others. Toyota's plug-in hybrids are probably the worst offenders. The average plug-in hybrid emits 3.5 times more than WLTP figures say. But Toyota's flagship green plug-in hybrids, which Toyota says are perpetual zero emissions machines that are basically able to just drive forever, but they were forced to remove that marketing, they are emitting 4 times more CO2 than the company's official figures. So they're a little bit worse than the average. The average WLTP figures on Toyota's plug-in vehicles is 22 grams per kilometre per Toyota. But the real-world data says that figure is closer to 93. So this is even more than 4 times, a bit more than 4 times. Toyota's plug-in vehicle emissions, though, are much closer to its average petrol car at 127.5. So 93 grams per kilometre for plug-in hybrids versus petrol cars from Toyota at 127.5. Not much difference there. But there's a massive gap between Toyota's claims. I mean, Toyota's claiming 22 grams. The reality is 93 grams. It's really quite shocking. Hybrid owners are paying much more than they bargained for, says The Driven. Emissions aside, many plug-in hybrid owners are paying much more to drive their vehicles than they are being led to believe. Fuel consumption data, and I've said this for many, many years. You see these claims, plug-in hybrid, 1 litre per 100 kilometres, you're only going to use 1 litre of fuel or a quarter of a gallon of fuel for 60 miles of driving. That's what they say. You could never get that, right? That's only if you drove it for a very short distance. On average, plug-in hybrids are actually using around 4.24 litres. So they're using about a gallon of gasoline per 60 miles or per 100 kilometres. Based on the current price of gasoline or petrol here in Australia of $2.23, that's an additional nearly $10 or nearly $6.50 US dollars per 100 kilometres or per 60 miles. That means the actual cost of operation is literally 4 times higher than what Toyota claims, or what you think. You might, maybe you go away, you do your car shopping, you do your numbers. Some people do spreadsheets, right? They work out what's it going to cost me to own this car. Basically, the cost of ownership is going to be potentially 4 times higher than what you thought it would be. That's massive. Guys, I honestly think car manufacturers are being targeted unfairly. I'm saying EV brands, right? We say, EV range is nowhere near what manufacturers are claiming. Sometimes it is actually, but often it isn't. And manufacturers say, yeah, this is often the case. But how often are we saying the claims of gasoline, petrol, diesel, plug-in hybrids, how often are we actually recognizing the fact that they never match reality? Very rarely. I mean, under strict laboratory conditions, maybe driving on a freeway at 60 miles an hour when it's flat and there's no wind, maybe then you'll get the manufacturer's claims. But in general, the manufacturer's claims for these vehicles are wildly optimistic. But for some reason, the media are constantly targeting EVs' claims. They're saying EV claims are wrong, but they never actually mention the fact that claims on all the other alternatives are probably even more wrong. And in this case, as you can see, they are wrong by a factor of 400%. I mean, no EV manufacturer has ever lied about the efficiency of their vehicles by 400%. Anyway, I think you can see my point. So I'll stop there. Thanks for watching.